Conversation Corner. Recording is now in progress. I wish to welcome everyone to this Conversation Corner this evening. Mary Turner is our moderator and David Rabinowitsch is our speaker this evening. Mary is a good friend who is entrepreneur extraordinaire, and I am going to hand it over to Mary. If you haven't yet, if you turn off your mic and mute, and you can also turn off your video, because sometimes that helps to allow for everybody to be able to hear without background. So I'll turn it over to Mary.
Well, good evening, everyone. We are in for a treat tonight. I was told to call him just David, so that's what I will do. David is scholar with the Global Academy of Holistic Nursing. He is treasurer of the Global Academy of Holistic Nursing and past president of the American Holistic Nurses Credentialing Corporation. David is currently an associate professor of nursing at York College of Cunny, where he teaches psychiatric mental health, community and adult health to nursing care. He has over 35 years of nursing experience, having worked in oncology, med-surg, psychiatric care, hospice and palliative care, home care, long-term care, nursing administration, nursing education. Wow. Dr. David earned a doctorate in nursing practice from Case Western University with a concentration in nursing education, completing research on healing touch offered for college credit. He has developed several holistic nursing courses for pre-licensure nursing students, as well as taught guided imagery and energetic healing for many years. In his work, he incorporates principles of holistic nursing into everyday care. Dr. David has spread the gifts of holistic health and wellness in the U.S. and abroad. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. David.
Well, welcome everybody. Hi. So this topic has come up in many different conversations that I've had. And in terms of my understanding, I've having attended many workshops on cultural diversity, on, we've all been around. We know that these workshops have had different ways of being and different titles. But what I find is that often we forget to practice our holism, that we're human beings and that we bring us to the plate, and we're all individually human beings. And I wanted to talk, and what I'm going to do this evening is to talk a little about giving some background. I'm going to talk a little bit about nursing theory. I'm going to include some discussion about cultural humility. We're going to do a guided imagery. I'll invite you to do a guided imagery because I think that's important. In terms of my practice, I do like just being called David. And even though I've got my doctoral degree and I've been a nurse educator for all of these years, up until COVID, I always had multiple clinical positions where nobody knew that I was had a doctorate and was teaching nursing education. I was just working and, he's the nurse on the weekend shift in the nursing home that we call because mom doesn't look good. And I come in there and do some education and I leave and I hear them say, mom's had COPD for 20 years and I never really understood until David was here what that was about. And I'm like, yeah, that's like the ultimate in why I practice, why I do what I do. But I think in terms of, this concept, the concept of other, and I also am going to say, this is in this workshop, please feel free to take notes. I don't have a lot of references because I know to a large extent I'm speaking to the choir. Okay, I know that a lot of this information may not be new, but hopefully the way I'm sharing it or presenting might have different resonance. And I think a lot of it is from my own experiences and then the experience that I use when I work with students. So, I did a workshop for Healing Beyond Borders. I'm a healing touch instructor and practitioner, and I did a workshop for them that was kind of similar. It's my holistic way of doing the sharing the topic about cultural humility, cultural issues, and I had to think about like me and who it was and the idea of being other. And I have really had a history of being other that may resonate with people. And if it doesn't, things don't resonate with people, we're going to do an imagery that maybe it does. So first of all, I remember back in terms of nursing, in the day of being the only guy in a room of women, and occasionally, more than occasionally, I would be in a conference room and, this other instructor is screaming at me. And I'm like, why is she screaming at me in that tone? And then all of a sudden I had a realization, wait a second, it's not me that she's screaming at. She's screaming at some other guy. And I represent that person. And I have to let go of that and not take that personally, right? I mean, this is an experience that's not unique to me. I mean, I've had other people have that experience. I've had other guys tell me that experience. And I've also had to work with men and put their way of knowing on the side, their egos on the side, and and in terms of certainly growing up as a gay kid in the 60s and 70s, homophobia was the norm. It still is the norm worldwide. If we think it doesn't exist, that's a myth. That's not the real world. There's still a lot of homophobia where we go in both directions. And certainly, being a Jewish kid being raised, let me also step back and say that I want to make it clear what's said here hopefully will stay here in terms of confidentiality, even though we may be talking on topics, and we can also, let's upfront agree to disagree. And my intention is not to offend anybody, but I do want to have some discussion that's real. And one of the things that we don't like to admit is that wherever we're from, whatever our society, one of the first words that kids learn is us, our group, and other. Whatever that word is. Growing up Jewish, I was very clearly told that watch the goyim, right? You didn't trust the goyim. And it's the history of my, pardon me? Yeah. It's my history. Again, it's my history from, my grandmother who grew up in Eastern Europe that helped raise me. My mother's family is from Poland. My father's family ended up in Sweden. So that's a whole other discussion. So my grandmother had very clear memories about not trusting others and not trusting outside of the community. They were real for her, right? And she's passing that on. But that's not unique to Jews. That's most societies have that concept of the in-group and the out-group. And how do we deal with the in-group and the out-group? And in terms of the strangeness too, it's like the reason my name is so strangely spelled is my father's family left what I was always told it was Russia, but in fact it was Lithuania and Belarus today. They went to Germany, and during World War I, they said, "Oh my goodness, World War I is happening. Let's get out of here." They tried to go to Denmark, couldn't go to Denmark, and ended up in Sweden. So my family, we're Swedish Jews, and yeah, so everybody please be aware that although I love confidentiality, Nikki made a good point, we are being recorded. So be aware of that. And I will be around if people want to talk separately, if there's things that are there. That's the difficulty of this media, of this world, of the Zoom world. On the other hand, I also, as a holistic nurse, really feel strongly like, wow, if we're going to be in this world, isn't this a great era to be in? That we're still able to do this work, that we're still able to function. So this idea of being other, and if you can imagine, um, my father having the experience of growing up in, um, he was born in 1910, and so during, growing up in Sweden, which was not a wealthy country, it was a poor country. It was neutral during World War I, it was neutral during World War II. The idea of being an immigrant, and he had the experience too. We talk about immigrants. They had rules about keeping others out. He had There were 3 kids at the time. There were more later on. 2 of the kids were born in Sweden. They couldn't rent an apartment for the first 6 months that they were there. So the entire family lived in a hotel room, right? I This is also in terms of the stories of like, now that I'm an adult, I can question some of the stories that my father told me, right? Like, how poor were you? Let's see, how poor were you? You drove during World War II. Your family had a car and drove. How poor were you? Okay, A. And B, how poor were you that you had enough money, that my grandparents had enough money that they were able to put kids up and live for 6 months living in a foreign country till they got their pieces. So there, anyway, that's part of my background and part of the idea about being other. And other has, we think about other doesn't necessarily always mean negative. Other can also be positive. I mean, I have, sometimes it's the other that people are attracted to, the uniqueness, as people are saying. So, but the concept of other. So that's how I came up with this idea about other. And I also, that my connectedness around this, that I think that it's not unique to me, and that even people that grow up in mainstream America still can have some connectedness there. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about how this connects to starting with self, about awareness of self, but also how it affects our practice with others, literally. And when we talk about some of the mothers of holistic nursing, and we talk about Martha Rogers, who really began the concept of what is time, what is our reality. And of course, Watson and Newman and Parsi, they all agree with this concept about like, what is time? It's all relative. And as a healing touch practitioner, I work with clients. When I work with clients, I help using the nursing process. I do an energetic and full person assessment and try to identify some patterns. But that's for all holistic nursing, the patterns. How do we identify the patterns? When we look at the holistic theorists, we understand that the universe, that the concept of time is all relative, right? The past is the now, the future is the now. It is all relative. We can look at quantum physics that theorizes that same principles, right? That time is relative. The now is the past. And one of my favorite oldies but goodies, and you might want to write this down, is a movie called Somewhere in Time, with a young Jane Seymour was in it. She was very young at the time, and Christopher Reeve, the original Superman. And it's Somewhere in Time. And the plot is that this guy reads a book and wants to practice this theory about doing hypnosis to go back in time, and he goes back in time, and it's about, you know, that being back in time, the idea of the present and the past interacting. And I want to say also, this concept, to us modern people in the United States or worldwide, whatever, it might be strange, but it's not, really shouldn't be strange, and it wouldn't be strange to our ancestors. And when we look, if we have and practice the concept of cultural humility, knowing that our way is not only the only way, there are many societies where the past and the present are together, where the ancestors are with you, literally. And as we go, I'm going to share one of my favorite times of year is we're coming to in the Jewish ritual calendar is Passover. And I always loved the ceremony of Passover. I mean, I was one of those kids where my grandfather was a kosher butcher, so he was pretty orthodox, and we would have lots of people there, and we would go and do the service, and it would sometimes be midnight before we had our main meal because it was such a long service for them to do it. But I always liked that. And now as an adult, I like to read the passages and read. Now, know that things are translated differently and there's different translations. But one of my favorite, this is the 1965 Maxwell House Passover Haggadah, which is available online. I downloaded it because we've had virtual Passover Seders with my cousins from Sweden and all over. But my favorite line is when telling the story, it says that in every generation, each individual is bound to regard himself as if he had gone personally forth from Egypt. Remember, Passover is about freeing of the Jews from slavery in Egypt. But how powerful is that? That in every generation, each individual is bound to regard himself as if you were there personally. That it is inviting time travel when you do the Seder. And it is not unique to, here I'm using the example from my culture, my background, but there are pieces of that. Now I'm going to say that's me as a holistic nurse reading this. There are people who don't get that. They're like, I also have taken many years ago, I took a course in Jewish shamanism because in the time of the temple, there were shamans. But even there, the concept of time is relative, and certainly, some of the Australian, when we say Australian Aboriginals, know that there's lots of societies. We say, oh, Australian Aboriginals as if they're all one society. There are many societies, right? I want to honor that as I say this. Their concept of time is different. So the concept of time is different. I'm going to go one step further. So we've got this idea that time is relative. Present is now, past is now, future is now. Know that literally when people said your ancestors are with you, energetically, they're with you. I'm going to go one step further and say, take a second to understand what is our knowing as from a Western scientific perspective about genes. Genes are pieces of things, proteins, that ultimately are energy, that provide who we are, that help us make us who we are. They come from the ancestors. Let me repeat that. Genes are slices of energy that are proteins, that are little pieces that set us unique, that help us bring us here, that made me with my lovely loss of hair and a beard instead, right? I mean, that's part of the genes that I've inherited. right? So does that make sense? And we know as a holistic nurse that energy is all relative, time is relative. Those genes are here. So literally, our ancestors are in us. Literally, our ancestors are with us and in us. And I will also say that when we so my master's degree is in psych mental health. In terms of other, that's another thing where I don't like often tell people historically my master's is in psych mental health because they pigeonhole you, right? My master's in psych mental health. Have I worked in patient psych? Yes, but that's not what I did with my practice. There was no holistic nursing at the time. And really, I knew I wanted to take care of the whole person. And I've historically worked with patients that are not, quote, psychiatric patients. They're patients that have mental health issues, which most people would if you were, 50 years old and told you've got a terminal illness, right? You need some emotional support. So I never liked, I would go to, I remember being in classes in my master's program and hearing hearing some of my colleagues talk about their practice and feeling like, whoa, that's not what I want to do, right? I was definitely an other then. And what this means in terms of my practice, that when I am working with clients and they're talking about their past, they're talking about their experiences, it is in the now. And if they're talking about their parents or they're talking about, if I'm doing some care and they're talking about the relationship with their deceased spouse, that deceased spouse is present. I don't see auras, I don't see spirits. I know that. Having said that, I honor that is another way of knowing. And I've had the experience of doing work and having someone come up to me. I remember the first time I did a practice in healing touch in hospice. My supervisor said, "Yeah, sure, go ahead, just get permission from the client," and I did. And I was doing this work with a client, a guy that was actively dying, and I knew that his wife was they were very religious, and I said, please, whatever your knowing is, I'm helping him go. And she started doing some prayers, and she said, it's very powerful. She said, Mother Mary was here with you. I'm like, hey, I'm a Jewish guy, but do I believe there was a Mother Mary? Did I feel like there were other people in the room? Yeah, I did. I didn't see it. But she said Mother Mary was there with you, was helping in the transition. And I was like, whoa, how do I learn this other? This is the way of other ways of knowing that is part of my knowing. How do I incorporate that? So that's my knowing. I will also say that the concept of being othered so this is where it gets a little touchy. I'm not going to repeat stuff. Most of us have had these workshops where people kind of give you lectures. More common, it's lecture, right? A lot of the stuff is lecture around cultural diversity. I remember so I was also being other. I was the one Jewish boy and St. Vincent's Hospital School of Nursing, which was an excellent nursing program in New York City. It was like the Harvard of nursing schools back in the day. And the woman who taught us what was supposed to be a cultural diversity course, we referred to her as Sister, I don't want to say her name, but Sister so-and-so bigot, okay, because she was a bigot. She would say Spanish people this, Black people that. It was stereotypes that she was teaching, okay. She took some knowledge and really perverted it. I think when we talk about cultural diversity, I think it is important for us to know pieces about different cultures. But I think we need to really be conscious that that's just information, that most people do not fit into a category, that it is wrong to put people in a little box, right? Um, and yet that's how often it was taught back then. And I'd be willing to bet a lot of it is today. And what I prefer is the term of cultural humility, which is talked about in the literature. It is talked about in nursing academia, but it is not as embraced as cultural diversity or cultural competence. Even the term cultural competence, like, are you ever really competent? I mean, we could say we are competent in things, you know, we're able to function. But the concept of cultural humility honors that each person I'm going to come in contact with, I'm going to learn their culture, their background, and be open. And that also mine is not necessarily better than theirs. That there can be some way of interacting with that client. It's a very different term. And in the United States, we are not aware of our biases. And I will say that I am among them. I thought, gee, I'm a New Yorker, I'm liberal, I have self-awareness. The more I travel, the more aware of what I don't know. I was not aware, for example, uh, when I first started going to visit my family in Sweden as an adult. It was interesting because when I was a teenager, my father tried to get me to move to Sweden for college. And being a typical teenager, I'm like, why would I go there? They come here, right? Because I hear Sweden. My cousins came to the United States for vacation, so that was my knowing of Sweden. Why would I go? Later on, I started to go to Sweden, and hanging out with my cousins, I learned how American I really was. How often it's in the my way of even our paradigms of looking. One of the things that we did a lot that my cousin pointed out was my cousins. We make a lot of comparisons in the United States. We make a lot of comparisons to the United States, assuming that ours is the norm. So my first time, I'm in Stockholm on a Saturday evening. There are 100,000 people on the main shopping street. Now, this conversation. This is in the early 1990s. Okay, um, and all the stores are closed. I mean, and I said to my cousin, I said, "This is so strange. You know, there are like all these people out on the street, and these stores are closed." And he looked at me shocked. He said two things. He said, "You want to make a comparison to the United States all the time." He said, "Here, you talk family values. We practice family values. Why would the workers have to be here on Saturday night instead of being home with their families? Do you really need to buy a belt at 8 o'clock on a Saturday night? The restaurants are open, the supermarket's open, right?" It was a different way of knowing. And I'm like, whoa, he's right. Instead, you saw people hanging out, like they respected and try. And we talk about free time. They live it, right? We talk about workplace balance. It was living it. I mean, this is why in those countries that it's not just the genetics that they live a long time, right? They practice what we're supposed to do. So that's also part of my awareness of cultural humility. And I will also say that I'm going to give honor Leininger, who did a lovely job of creating a system for us to take a look at in terms of analyzing cultures, and I think it's very valuable. But I think that the biggest thing is that people have then taken it and used it as stereotypes. And I'll also say what I love about Leininger when I look at her theory, when we talk about culture, it doesn't, we assume that it's this macro culture, this big culture. I want everybody to just take a breath for a moment and think about the first time they went to their spouses or partners or friends' house, even if they were, quote, the same culture, and how odd that was, right? I mean, it's the same culture, but things were placed differently. There was so much said and unsaid about being in that culture. We could take a look at that idea of culture and bring it down to a family. And there are uniquenesses within the family. So instead of just looking at the culture, let's examine them. So, and as a gay man too, I will also say, where does it fit? I have friends from that are from very restrictive cultures in terms of homophobia, very, very homophobic, but they're part of their culture. How do they fit? Their culture is different, right? And they've created their own culture. And so we need to understand the uniqueness of their culture. And that's part of the concept of cultural humility that I like to share, to talk about. Okay. Let me just say, I also, so I talked about the genes are our energetic inheritance of our ancestors. Also, there are energetic patterns that are shared within families and community. So when I talk about the said and unsaid, again, think about the first time you were in that family, even if they were the same cultural background as yours, it was different. There was uniquenesses that were there, and that's part of understanding cultures and energetic patterns. Okay. And I want to share a little bit more definitions about the concept of cultural humility. So this is, Miller's one of the theorists in the Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology, and I think I gave that reference. It was an early one. Miller states that cultural humility is the first step in becoming a global healthcare provider. That's really heavy. That's true. That the idea of our culture, that we're aware of our culture, and that we honor that we're not the only way, right? There are ways of knowing, ways of being that are different. I'm going to also say one of my, I was very fortunate in helping have a group of nursing students it wasn't just nursing students, it was, I was the director of an RMBSN program at Pacific College of Health Sciences, which is an acupuncture school. It was one of the first maybe the only one, RMBSN program housed in an acupuncture traditional Chinese medicine college. And they have massage students and people that were in the acupuncture program. I helped lead them or helped organize, facilitate, whatever, a group of students to go to Tanzania. And when I was in Tanzania, I had an incredible learning because I came with the philosophy of cultural humility and awareness that I'm there to serve. So one of the things is that, the director of nursing was very kind, but she was having some inspectors from Japan come to visit her. And they had given them donations. So she was frantically trying to clean. And here I was, she wanted to attend to me, but she was busy, like the director of nursing was cleaning. I said to her, I can clean, give me the mop. And I started mopping. I didn't realize how strange that was, that the idea of this white man in this country was mopping the floor in the hospital. Okay, that's just who I was. I was later in a workshop with the physicians and they were talking to me, and all of a sudden this came in, and that the medical director said, excuse me, Professor Rabinowitsch, you have to go to the headmistress's office now. I'm like, what? I'm called to what did I do wrong? She invited me for tea. I'm like, whoa, what an experience. And it was that process there. But also, while I was there, I learned, the thing that strikes me the most in terms of awareness, the tuberculosis clinic. Okay, I asked to please sit in a clinic because I love community health. I don't need to see as much inpatient. The nurses knew all of their patients. They had paper cardboard records. The patients would come to them with these paper records. They would come for monthly tuberculosis medications. Could you think about that for a second? Our clients complain about if the check-in was too long, right? And here, these guys said, well, I got a job temporarily in the capital. So I was that's why I haven't been here for the last 3 months, is because I was at my sister's house. She got me a job. So I'm sorry I missed the things, but here's my records. And they would bring paper records of their medications with them. And the nurse would say, tell me about your sister. How is she? How's your family? You would think that they're chit-chatting. What they're really doing is establishing relationship with their patients so that their patients were able to respect them. And they told her, one after the other, they told them about the I didn't the biggest problem there is alcohol, right? With a lot of this stuff. That's why the people that are coming to the tuberculosis clinic often are not cured. It's worldwide, right? I mean, substance abuse. We have an alcoholism problem in this country we don't talk about. That's a whole other discussion, right? The things that are unsaid in our society. We talk about all the drug use, which is a problem, don't get me wrong, but we have a serious alcoholism problem too. So they would be honest with her and say, I stopped taking my meds. So she'd say, listen, even when you're drinking, we need to find a way for you to take these medications because tuberculosis is going to kill you as quickly as the alcohol. Right. So that's also part of the knowing of that we don't know everything, the cultural awareness and cultural humility. So what I'd like to do is I've talked about these patterns. I've talked about some of the sharing. What I'd like to do, I'm also going to talk for a minute about about also two things about being othered, and maybe I don't think I said this before. Part of my conversation that I've had with Jim before too is at the last AHNA conference, I fell on my knee. I always say you got to look at the glass half full, half empty. I had major trauma to my knee. I literally fell. I took the pose on my knee. All 200 pounds of me, boom, on the knee, right? It is shattered. It is not bone. It is soft tissue damage. There is significant. How lucky was I that I was at a place where there were nurses, right? And every place I went, instead of focusing on the negative, I consciously focused on some of the positive. So part of I said I got to make myself the best patient possible. I went to rehab. I asked for the most significant rehab. I said to them, is it okay if I wear my knapsack? Because I work in New York City. I take the subway. I need to wear a knapsack. Like that's the real deal. So I made sure that I wore, what is it, 10, 15 pounds of 10 pounds of a knapsack while I'm doing that. All right. So I'm discharged and I come home and I'm in rehab. Here are some observations that I had. Remember I said the past is now? Here's an example of how my past became now and how as a patient, how did it affect me? I had a lovely team, and in discharge, I went to a local physical therapist, very nice guy, local practice, two physical therapists that shared a room, very, very nice. Part of my practicing of being able to stand on one leg was he tossed me a basketball and said, practice with the soft little mini basketball, throwing it against the wall and catching it. I burst into tears. In that second, I was an 8-year-old in gym watching the other kids, one other kid who I'm probably was, I don't know, being called faggot. Stop throwing the ball like a faggot. I was that 8-year-old. It wasn't me. It was another kid. But here I am at 8 or 9 being aware that I'm different, that I didn't know the words, but knew that, hey, that faggot is probably me. And he's calling him faggot. Throwing the ball, I was there. And it was profound. And we have to have first of all, again, cultural knowing, very nice therapist. I told him what was going on. He had no concept of what I was talking about, no awareness. He was into the physical, in the medical model of like, well, you need to learn to stand. What do you mean? You're not 8 years old anymore. You're an adult. If you don't feel like no awareness that I was dealing with trauma, that I was not prepared at all. Here I was coming in for physical therapy. I mean, I eventually modified the way of doing. I said, how about I just hold the ball and move it from one hand to the other? Because that's different than throwing it and trying to catch it. And I always was told, oh, you're uncoordinated. And then I'm thinking to myself now as an adult, what do they mean uncoordinated? I'm a nurse. Think about how much coordination we have to do. I can change a wound using sterile technique. Dirty hand, clean hand. Set up the field. And a dog running around that you're shoving away at the same time with one foot, right? How did I get that label of uncoordinated? Part of uncoordinated is you didn't act like what they thought a boy would look like, right? That's part of the being uncoordinated label was. And that was like wow. That was like a whoa for me. So this concept about being other really affected me as a patient. I'm going to also say, I always heard people say, we talk about disability, people with different abilities being treated as invisible. Going around the airport, people would knock into me. I'm in the airport, no control. I have to come back to New York. I'm both in Orlando and in New York. I said to the people that were pushing me, I said, is it just me, or do they like don't see us? They're like, this is it every day. They're into their own world, and you're in a wheelchair. You don't exist. I said, it's like I don't exist. They're like, yeah, you don't exist. You don't exist. I'm standing with a cane at a theater in Manhattan. They asked for everybody to step off of the area in front of the lobby so that we kept the street clear, and that the people who were waiting, there were sectioned off area in the street for us to stand. I'm near the front. This guy backs in like I don't exist. I said, excuse me, I'm here. Hello, I'm here. Not listening to me. His wife looks at him. I said, could you tell him I'm here? She's like, Charlie, there's a guy behind you. Oh, there is? Oh, him. Oh. I'm like, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I heard it, but experiencing it for the first time. I see it. And I'm very conscious. Like now I still teach clinical 1 day a week. So I take public transportation in the city, and I'm very, very conscious about the experience of being disabled is for real. And I have to be very conscious about when I'm walking, because literally people will knock into me as if I don't exist. It is shocking. How do they not? Because as a nurse, I would never have done that, right? As a nurse, I was the one, like I wouldn't have to ask somebody to stand up. Like get on the train, and like these teenagers are like, excuse me, that's the disabled seats. can somebody please stand up? Like I would never have to, nobody would have to ask me. I was up. But today, it's a different world, completely different world, completely. So that idea about being other and the invisibility of disability is real. I've experienced it, and it's real. What I'd like to do, so even though I'm sharing some of the negative stuff, I'd like to invite you to participate in an exercise so that you can be aware of some of the pieces. And I'm very conscious about using the word invite because it's an invitation. And even with yourself, when you have a party, you invite people. If they show up, that's great. If they don't show up, I mean, I don't know what the rules are. Like, it's an invitation. If somebody calls up and said, listen, I've got something else. Can I just come for coffee? Okay. It's an invitation. So I'm going to do an invitation. You're in charge. I want to make it very clear. You're in charge of this experience. So this is an offering, and it can be difficult. So it's an invitation to join me in a visualization. And again, I'm going to use the word invite. And by the way, I love doing that when I use guided imagery or teach with guided imagery. I encourage you to think about using the word invite. Often people don't invite. They just tell people do this, that, and the other thing. And that could often bring them to a place that they're not ready for. So this is an invitation, and I'm reminding you, I'm guiding you in your imagery, and you are in charge. That's setting my space. Okay. Also, so let's be conscious of it. And I'm also going to do some other connections. So it'll just help balance us. And hey, let's try it. Let's see what happens. So I invite you to get comfortable in your chairs, or wherever it is you're sitting. Because I know at home you might be in the bed, on the toilet, I don't know, wherever. Get yourself comfortable wherever you are. If you're able to put your feet on the floor, able to sit up properly is better. If you're able to breathe through your nose and out through your mouth, that's more effective. But breathe the way you want because it's your experience, right? This is an offering. And lately, I like to put my hands, this is me. I've started in my more recent meditations, especially since my health issues, I put my hands on my heart. And the heart is both energetically, it's a symbol, it's the middle chakra. Think about transculturally, it's an important piece. So, and the heart is what I'm hoping to bring with you as well, and to connect to your heart. So I invite you to consciously breathe. And if you'd like to, I invite you to consciously breathe into your heart. And I invite you to take a moment to connect to the earth, to the ground, to the center of the earth, to Mother Earth, whatever is your knowing. And I invite you to feel that energy and that love. Energy is love. Feel that energy and love from below come up through you into your heart, flowing nicely and evenly, using your breath to help as needed. Allow it to naturally fill your heart with love and energy, love and light. And now, as you connect to the earth, into your heart, I invite you to bring your awareness above your physical body and connect to the sky, the heavens, the clouds. If it's your knowing, I invite you to bring in divine guidance. God, whatever it is that you call, or that calls you, as you connect from above, feel that energy and love from above come down into your heart, filling your heart with love and light. Allow it to flow naturally into your heart. And now, in this moment, with a full heart, I invite you to do some time travel. I invite you to bring your awareness to a time where you experienced other. And it may have been not necessarily you. The other might be observing another being othered, someone else being othered, or yourself being othered. And I invite you to recall or remember that experience. I invite you to view it as a distance if that's more comfortable for you, or if you choose to connect with it, it's your choice. And take a moment to hear the words, if there were any, or sounds. What were the images, the colors, the light, the background? What was that like for you? Can you remember the aroma or the sense? And again, if you need to step back, do that, because it's your experience and your journey. Remember to breathe. And now I invite you to take another look and save that experience, that message, that knowing for your future self or present self. And allow that divine energy into your heart and send appreciation for this learning. Feel the love and light from the earth and the heavens from above, connecting to your higher knowing. Allow that circuit of light and love to continue. And when you are ready, I invite you to become aware of the way your body feels in the chair and your feet feel on the floor. And if you like, you can wiggle your toes and your feet and take a few more breaths to bring you back to this time. And I also invite you to take a moment to write something down if you call to about the knowing of the other. And as you process this, you might want to think about what was the pattern, what was the learning like. And if you are called to share with the group, I'm going to ask that people be respectful about their tones and their expressions that they use, and be open to different patterns of knowing if you'd like to discuss. And if you don't want to discuss, that's okay too. That's absolutely okay. And in the end, I do also have some little pieces that I'd like to add.
Okay. Would anybody like to share?
And I want to make it clear, this is not like other guided imageries where everybody in holistic nursing decides like I have to speak because somebody's speaking. So it's okay if people don't, if people aren't comfortable, if people would like to, that's wonderful. Julia.
Julia?
Yes, I had an imagery. Body image is one of ways in which I've been other. And I was in first grade, and this little boy called me a name. And later in my life, with an expressive arts activity, I had everybody write all the names they'd ever been called. And of course, that can evoke some of those memories. And what was good about it for me was that I felt distant from it. I knew it wasn't mine, it was his. I believe I've made peace with the way my body is in this life. And I felt some distance. And it's the first time I was aware of not feeling ashamed or different. So I felt like, it just was a very positive experience. So thank you, David.
Thank you for sharing.
Anyone else?
She has her hand up.
Mickey?
I had a lot of memories come to me, but one of them, the ones that I've thought about a lot over the years, was when I worked in the Black Hills in a rural community hospital. Or actually, this was a VA, but it was a small town. And I was working with a gentleman from the Pine Ridge Reservation. And he said something along the lines of, I don't even remember how our conversation started, because they often were very mistrustful of white people, as they should be, because I learned very quickly that the perception was that they were lazy, they didn't, care about things, they weren't aware of and didn't care about their health because they didn't show up, on white man's time. And he said, "You white people," he said, "We're out walking on the reservation." He said, "We're out walking." He said, "And we're 20 miles from where we need to go." He said, "And if one of mine pulls up next to me, they open the door and I get in." He said, "But a white person," and I don't even remember the name he used. He wasn't being nasty, but it was not a name that I was used to being called. But he said, "If you pull up, you will roll down the window and you say, 'Would you like a ride?'" He said, "It's a given that if you're out walking, you want a ride, you need a ride." He said, "But because you don't understand the distance, because you don't understand that many of us don't have cars or our cars break down, you make the assumption that it's by choice." And I've thought a lot about that, about white privilege, and so David, the exercise allowed me, and Julie, I appreciate you saying other about body, because I've always felt that way. And I think that, the size 0, which is what you are when you've been dead for 6 months. But the ideal body image is always something that I've struggled with. And so this came as an exercise that allowed me to visit a lot of those memories, that helps me remember that each interaction is an opportunity for an aha. So thank you, David.
That was beautiful. Teresa, I see your hand is up. Would you like to share?
There we go. A couple of things. I when I was in high school, because of my height, and I wasn't, the little skinny mini size 0 that Margaret referred to. I used to get called names about that, and I never realized until much after high school how painful that really was and how much it really has affected me over my life. And it still sometimes does. And it look, I look at people and I see them looking at me, and that's hurtful when people look at you for being obese or for being tall. And I mean, I'm 5'10", and in high school, oh geez, how many years ago, that I was the tallest one in my class, always was, always the largest one in my class. And I just think it's something that I see now as bullying and in our society, with all of the advertisements and everything that goes on. And we're teaching our young girls and boys as well that in order to make it in life, you have to be thin and pretty and, yada, yada, yada. And it's very painful. I mean, I think it causes a lot of anorexia and bulimia in young girls. We're seeing an increase in that, and suicide as well, along with that. So it just makes me sad, to think about how that affects body image, affects our lives. Lots of therapy.
It's part of
Yeah.
being the other.
Yeah, it is. Thank you, David.
Was Marianne trying to talk? I just have some more notes that that I have here that I do want to connect to something that Nikki said. When she talked about privilege, I think that, what is it? I think we know it. I think all of us have privileges in different ways. How do we use it? How do we learn it? We kind of like it's like a given. Like, people are not even aware that they have privileges. But those of you that are aware, I invite you to share the whole holistic nursing concept of the Wizard of Oz and be Glenda the Good Witch, right? I think Glenda's a good witch, and I'm very conscious. There are times I'm very respectful. I've been to meetings where I'm at a table and I'm the only guy, and the women are being totally ignored in the restaurant. I will not just automatically order. I'm going to say, guys, look, we see what's going on here. Would you like me to use my white male privilege, or should I'm totally okay doing that, but I'm not going to assume that it's okay for me to do that. And I think that's part of what I mean by Glenda the Good Witch. And the other thing I want to mention just briefly is we've all been lectured to about the concept of microaggressions, and I think we're all guilty of that in terms of our communication. That sometimes it's the small unconscious statements, facial expressions, body gestures, etc. It's like, Teresa, it's like when you walk into a restaurant and you want to sit down and somebody's like, oh my goodness, they're going to sit next to me, right? That subtle is a microaggression. And it often makes the person feel less than or disempowered. And by the way, what I also say in terms of about being conscious of privilege, I, as a nursing instructor, have often talked about uncomfortable topics because I feel it's really important. And to say I don't have the answers. I mean, I remember when I was a new instructor being in a nursing home. And when I tell the story, you're going to be people are going to be surprised. And my student comes to me in my class. I had one of there were back then we had 10 students, and about half of the class was African American and the other half were Caucasian. And one of my African American students comes in, we're in post conference, and she's like, that patient wouldn't let me do anything but wash her up. She wouldn't let me check her blood pressure. She's like, don't you have one of those white students? Why are you not assigning a white student with me? And I said, I don't really know, like how, we're in a nursing home. How do you find, you've got to find the balance. What was that like? That's real. I'm so sorry you had that experience. Can we talk about that? How do we handle that? And now, as I say this, everybody is picturing a white patient. It was not. It was the one African American patient in this nursing home who felt that I was giving her a different patient because she was Black, that I wasn't giving her a white patient, a white student. And she wasn't getting the same level of care. That's her experience. Because at first you want to get angry, like, how dare that patient have that experience? And then I'm like, wait a second, she has different experiences. So we had a conversation about it. I'm like, I don't know how to respond. I want to support you. And what they said to me, I was very happy. What one of them said was, Professor, you don't understand. You've helped us by saying it's real. When we said the same thing happened in another facility, the teacher said, oh no, you must have misheard. Like, no, the student did not mishear. The student's experience was the student's experience, and they were right. So it's also being open to that.
There's a question in the chat, David. Do you see it from Piper?
Do you have any to-go sayings or comments when you are in a situation where you are the other and feel like you have to address the person? I might want to just say, excuse me, can you just take a moment and hear what you just said? Can you just tell me what you just said and say, what is that like? If you were me, how would you hear that comment? Because I think people say things without even realizing it. They say things in their stereotype. They say things without realizing. And to just tell somebody it's hurtful is not helpful, right? To say to them, can you say that again? And how would you feel? What would your sense be if I said that to you or you or me? Or what was that about? Also, my favorite thing, what was that about? What was that comment about? What was the goal in saying that comment? And sometimes you have to tell people. I mean, I'm like, here's another like flabbergasted how my husband's family is German, and he literally has cousins that are Nazis. I'm not making it up. They live out in the middle of the country and have Nazi flags up. Okay, I don't know them. I don't know these cousins, but I've heard from them. But I have had conversations when his sister-in-law, who's also from that background, says to me, the problem from the problem with the city is that I can't even say it because it's so upsetting to me, and it's slurs. Okay, I'm not going to use the slurs. The problem with this area is that the Jews came in and then they sold to the N-word. Okay, and I'm like, what are you saying? What are you saying? What are you saying? That is totally wrong. That's totally outrageous. How do you use that word? And how do you even like that thinking? Do you understand that you just said that to someone who is Jewish? A. B, it's so wrong. So you're saying because the Jews didn't discriminate, they're responsible for the change in the community. Not, oh my goodness, the community is becoming ethnically diverse. Okay? Like, really? Did you hear yourself? But you know what? There were times also where I told her off, where I said to her, I'm not coming here again. And there was a 6-month period where we didn't visit her because she had said so many hurtful things. And that was very hard. That was very hard. She would also say things like, I love you and Bill, even though you're not normal. Okay. So I have to remember that she is who she is. And in her, she thought she was giving me a compliment, right? She thought like, wow, I love you so much that I'm overlooking the fact that you guys are a gay couple, right? Like her backhanding. I'm like, then I'm like, how do you find, there is not an easy answer. That's the thing. There are no clear answers for these situations. There are not. And what works for one might not be the other. But I also say, did you hear what you said? Can you hear, looking back on it, can you hear what you, she's evolved. Having said that, Bill's sister-in-law has evolved. I also did tell off one of his cousins who grew up in Germany. And she said, you know, what we hear is about the concentration camps. Well, we Germans suffered too. I'm like, yeah, I admit your mother died after the war because there were no drugs. That is a horrible situation, but don't compare. There is no comparison. The Nazis started the war. Those are the facts. You have propaganda. Those are the facts. Please understand that what you're saying when you're trying to make comparisons, it's actually very hurtful. Your experience is your real experience. You can just say my mother died because after the war we lost the war and there were no drugs given to us. And that's an awful experience. It's an awful experience. I have no doubt. But how do you can't make comparisons. It's very hard. I mean, that was just some of my, but the idea is to be conscious of it. And to also, there are times where you need to raise it if you're hearing it. I mean, I, as an instructor, have challenged students when they've said things, right? And they're shocked. Like I had students that said, I mean, one of my schools, they look at me like I have three heads. I'm like, oh, you know, we're a diverse school. I said, excuse me. What describe diversity? You're an African-American college. The majority of the students are African-American. This school does not reach out to the Asian community. This school does not reach out to the Orthodox Jewish community in there. That's part of the community. You're not, quote, a diverse school. You do not actively talk about other diversities. So be careful with the language and challenge it, right? Just because you're a predominantly African-American school does not mean you're diverse. And is your diversity, how are you about the LGBTQ community, right? That's a whole other discussion. This was back in the day. I think the school is much more diverse, really is diverse because of trainings, but there's still stuff that goes on. And yeah, I mean, I think we have to speak up. We have to speak up too. And we also, if you're in a position of education, to consciously create opportunities for discussion. That's the other piece. And to set the stage that it's okay to disagree, but we need to have the conversations. And each person's pattern and each person's knowing each person is valid and authentic from their background. Like my sister-in-law, I have to remember that's who she is. You know, she's her background. I come from a blue collar background too, but she has really not evolved from that and is still she's the wife of a New York City cop from the 1950s, and she still is. She still has that mentality. So
I think Marianne wanted to comment.
sure.
Where is she? She may have dropped off.
Yeah, it's getting later.
Yeah. And, you know, I really appreciated when you said when you traveled, you noticed that Americans compare everything to the United States. And what you observed when you went to Sweden is they really do have values that they live by. They're not just words that they say. And I do notice that in the United States, our audio and our video don't match. We have a concept of the way things are supposed to be, and we really don't prioritize our life to match our values.
Yeah, and I think you're really, that's really true, Mary. And it's interesting we have the dialogue now. I'm sometimes seeing commercials and I'm like, okay, so they put the people of color were thrown in there, but the message is not, is not, and like, whoa, right? It's, it's odd sometimes.
Well, how do you see us bridging the gap so there is no such thing as other?
I don't think there's anything wrong with having other. I think it's the negativity of the other. The other can also be like, wow, we're diverse. Like, wow, isn't this wonderful that we have so many other opinions in the room, that we have such a diversity of people in the class. I mean, I love one of this where I'm teaching now is much more diverse, and I mean, I've had to learn I've had to learn about, I've had the privilege of learning about Nepal. I had a student from Nepal, and we spent some time talking about it in class and asking some questions, and then how did she adjust to being in the United States. And then I've also had a number of students, like I heard two students that were speaking Chinese to each other. One was born in the United States, and the other one was born in China. And we were talking, it became a conversation about what's the Chinese community like. And by the way, one thing I love about New York, at the end of the semester, a lot of times I teach community health, and I do a walking tour of New York, and we usually end up in Chinatown because I love Chinese food. And I had try to meet the needs of my students. I have students that practice halal, and I've had students that practice kosher. So the last 2 years, I went to a restaurant that was uniquely New York, that was a kosher vegetarian restaurant in Chinatown. And I said, whoa, I'm in New York. And the two students that were Chinese that came said, we have never eaten vegetarian Chinese food. This was an experience, and they'd never eaten anything that was kosher. So it became a discussion about what makes them kosher and what makes them, it became a lovely discussion about how wonderful other can be.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. When I think of the word other, it just seems like it has a negative connotation, like you said. And there's so many other words that we can use because it's like exclusive.
And it has been used for other, to other somebody, to put them in another category. But I think you can also look at it as like, wow, look at all these other people here. Isn't it wonderful? Let's bring these others together to make a community.
Yeah.
That's the piece that I'd like people to take away, that as we honor the other. And I think that's also important, because I've been at workshops where someone I worked with and I'm stereotyping, I apologize. The school, almost all the faculty were, upper middle class women, white women from an Irish and Italian background. I was, like, of course, the only Jewish guy there, which is okay. And the school was predominantly, the students were exactly the opposite. They were predominantly the majority minority, and very diverse minority. Like, I was wonderful to teach there. I had Nigerian, like first generation Nigerian students, first generation. It was really, and I had to teach the African American students not to other the African students as we were having conversations. Like, no, they speak differently. Don't tell me you don't want to be in that group because they, quote, speak with an accent. That's got to be your learning of how to work with them, because they're going to be your colleagues, right? You need to learn how to work with them. So at the end of one of the workshops, one of the faculty, this is the statement, I don't understand this entire conversation. Like, why are we even having this? Aren't we all children of God? Okay, we're all children of God. But I use another analogy. It's like, and to say, I treat all people like they're exactly the same. Well, if you treat everybody exactly the same, then you don't see the uniqueness in them. Right? And so part of the conversation, if we use the analogy of I love this analogy my colleague taught me when she taught cultural diversity. She talked about she started a class by buying a box of Crayola crayons, and she would give out the Crayola crayons and have each person write a story of the Crayola crayon, right? about the Crayola crayon. The question is, how do we honor the colors of the Crayola crayon, the diversity of the crayon, and how do we make room? This is more important. How do we make room for the other colors? That's even just as important, powerful.
Yeah.
How do we make space for the other crayons in that box? That goes back to privilege, because we're all privileged. All of us here are middle class, educated, and like I understand something that Mickey was telling her story. I'm going to go back to that in terms of what's said and unsaid. I could also see if I was Native American and I'm walking on the street and somebody comes over and said, "Would you like a ride?" I'm like, "Do you mean I have to ask for what's obvious?" Right? You're putting that person as having to ask for a ride instead of saying, "Hop on in."
That was it, David. That was exactly it. And when you're 20 miles out and it's 100 degrees and there's nothing, if you're lucky, you might see a cow in the distance or a tree. It's like being out in the desert.
Right.
Why
The
would
question
you?
it should be, "I'm going to so and so, hop on in. Let me know where to drop you off." Yeah. I mean, that's also part of making the room and asking the question. So the question is, how do we make room for this in this Crayola box? That's also part of it, understanding that maybe it's not said.
Yeah. Teresa
Yeah,
said,
remember there was
my
a flesh
favorite
color.
things to do is just walk the streets in New York and Washington, D.C., and hear the other language and see the true diversity or the populations living together.
Right. And having fun with it, and sometimes we go to the edge, but listen, that's what I love about me. That's why I love New York. Sorry. That's why I love New York.
Teresa, did you want to say something? Okay.
Just a cute little story about that. My grandchildren are biracial. So for a very brief time, I lived in a small town in kind of south of Charlotte. Well, it is south of Charlottesville, but not south in Virginia. And I called my daughter one weekend and I said, she lives, about 30 minutes out of the city. And I said, "Jessica, I'm coming this weekend." I said, I want to go into DC. I need a lot. I just need some culture. I just look at white people here. And she started laughing. She goes, "Well, Mom, you can come to my house. There's plenty of culture here." She said, "Your son-in-law is African American." I said, "I know, I can't, but I need more. I need more." So it was a fun thing. So I went up and sure enough, we did. We just walked around the city and listened to everyone. It was just wonderful. And of course, when you live in we lived in Los Angeles for a while, it's the same. Just listen to all of that. And it's just, and you wonder what they're saying, what they're talking about. And fascinating.
And I'm going to pick up on what you're saying, Teresa. I think that's the other thing is, especially a lot of us who are nurse educators, in terms of creating opportunity. For a while, I was the international coordinator for Healing Beyond Borders, and everybody wanted to go travel abroad. I'm like, well, how about you start with your own community? Do you go to the other side of the track? Do you teach in that local church? Do you offer workshops in that local church? Martin Luther King, I think it was Martin Luther King who said the most segregated day in America is Sunday. Right? And it is still true today, except people don't go to church the same way. But it's that concept, right? And I would invite that you consciously create opportunities to explore other and to have them do. I have my students also do. You'll find it online if you go to Sociology has participant observer exercises, and they often will have even rubrics on doing a participant observer where you go into a community and so for instance, I will tell students, I would like you to go shopping in that other community. I would like you to go to that restaurant. Somebody says, oh, I'm Muslim. I'm like, is it okay? Can you make arrangements? Are there people could you invite? Is it okay for us to have some students who've never been to a mosque go to a mosque? Yeah, let's do that. Right? Let's do that. And create that as a learning opportunity. Because it's part of the knowing, part of that exchange. It's really important in terms of understanding. And again, we are a diverse in the United States. We're much more diverse, even in places that are predominantly one racial group or another. There's diversity within the groups.
Yeah.
I think that's also there's diversity that needs to be respected and flourished and supported and explored in terms of knowing. So it's also being open. And I want everybody to just take a breath and just think about how wonderful it was to experience others, and being open to others. So
Yeah.
thank you
Yeah.
for joining me in the journey in the walk.
David,
I think Mickey has something to say.
I just wanted to comment because I had an aha listening to you about the crayon box exercise. And then Bonnie saying there used to be a flesh colored crayon. And I remember very young trying to, they say color a picture of yourself, that it was really important that I would get, in my crayon and get the color tones right. And one of the things that I thought about, the aha, was when you said we need to make space for others. And I thought, is there a different way to think about it? Because, my husband was in Sierra Leone, my brother was in Botswana, and there people made space for them. But the reality is that when we say we're making space for somebody, is there not an implication then that we are, I don't know, I'm like, does that imply, and I don't even know how to put it in words, but it's kind of like
Limited space in the block box, as opposed to saying we need a new box.
we need a new box, because space implies to me that we're doing something, I don't want to say out of the goodness of our hearts or whatever, to include somebody else. And that's not it. It's about being in the box together. And yeah, I would say we need a new box.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, David,
Yes.
is there anything else you want to say?
No,
There's only a couple of us.
No, I think, and we're over the